As part of the wider civil service reform that the government started, firstly the Bainimarama government, of course then the Fiji First government started, in particular in the past 18 months or so, where we had an enormous focus in respect to the reforms, both with the starting off with the World Bank reviews of the individual ministries as to where you're positioned, how you're positioned, the positions that you have within your individual ministries, whether they're actually applicable to 21st century Fiji. Of course, as you know, that many of the positions that were created in the respective ministries were in fact created at independence. You did not have computers. We still had typists. So nobody had laptops. People did not have PCs on their desks. You had business processes that were very archaic now compared to what business processes you have now, or the potential for you to have those business processes now. So we started off by that. We have individual ministries that are still being reviewed. But as part and parcel of that, we of course recognize, and what is really critical in any organization is of course the human resource capital. The human resource capital is critically important. Of course you can have the best computers and technology, etc., but you need actually people there to resource it, to use it. And of course, if you don't have the best people for the right jobs, then you won't be able to use the best, you won't be able to make the best use of that technology that you do have, or the best processes that you may have in place. So it is very critical for us to be able to ensure that we invest in our people. And how do we invest in our people? There are of course numerous ways. You get them exposed to training, but more fundamental than that is to have the right people in the right positions. This is very, very critical. I'm sure, for example, the permanent secretary for fisheries won't want a person who's very good in IT to be able to go and monitor the fish resources that are being fished out of our waters. The same way the PS for forestry would want the best forester, best qualified person, best experienced person to be able to help him manage our forest reserves or our forestry area. So the idea is that we need to ensure that we have the best people for the right positions. This is why we talk about merit-based appointments. This is why we talk about having a transparent process within the system. And to be factually correct, unfortunately, the civil service over the past number of decades, in particular post-1987, has actually suffered from a lack of transparency and a lack of appointments being made on merit. And that's a fact. What it does as a result of that, it inculcates a sense of a couple of ways. The sword cuts both ways. It inculcates, for example, for some people a self sense of entitlement. For some people, it also they believe that they can then progress, for example, progress along the lines because they have been in the system for a longer period. So you may have, for example, somebody who's been in the system for 5 years, completely competent, very suitable for the position or for the next rank up. But you may have somebody who's been there, who's been plodding along for the last 12 years or 15 years, and they believe they should get it just because they've been there plodding along for the last 12 or 15 years. That sort of idea needs to get out. We need to be able to ensure that we have the best people appointed for the right positions. And that is very critical. Because most of you who are here in this room are senior representatives of your organization. It makes your job a lot easier if the people who are working for you are the best people for that job. Makes your job a lot easier. I personally love that idea. And it makes sure that everybody else's jobs actually get a lot easier too. If the permanent secretary is sitting there, if he or she is to make a decision, if they have the best minds around him or her, then obviously they'll make the best decision. If it's going to be open to public scrutiny, he is able to say or she is able to say, I've got this input and I'm able to stand on my feet and say, I've made the right decision. And you can go to bed sleeping well at night. So this is the whole point of it. The whole point of merit-based appointments is to get the best people for the right job. You know, I'll give you an example. In the Attorney General's chambers, in the past 3-4 recruitments that we've had, all merit-based appointments, 90% of the people who've been appointed have been women. in those positions, purely on merit. Now, if you look at the history of recruitment in the AG's office previously, it was essentially male-dominated. It was fundamentally, there was no point system, there was no transparent system. It was essentially who you knew. You knew somebody was graduating and, they were mates, brothers or sisters or uncles or aunties or whatever it was, cousins, and people got into the system because of that. Merit-based appointment, we can stand up on our own feet and say these people have been appointed on merit. Does it matter to me where they come from, what gender they are, what part of Fiji they come from, what ethnicity they are, what church they go to, what religious faith they belong to? No. Because I know that these people will do their best for the organization, for me. I ring them up at 2 a.m. in the morning and get my answer at 5 a.m. in the morning. It's a level of dedication and commitment that I have. I'm not saying that should be the test or bench mark for assessing how well people are doing or how well they are committed. That is very fundamental. Now, it also makes the workplace, your job enjoyment, your satisfaction levels a lot more enhanced. Now, the second point, of course, is that we need to ensure that the people who work in these positions are also remunerated well. They are remunerated as they should be. We have a standard practice that we have the various grades, administrative officer, senior administrative officer, principal administrative officer, and whenever they get promoted, we always start them at the lowest base rate. Then you work hard, you slog hard, maybe you might get some increment, you may be stuck in that position. So in Fiji, we are very driven by titles, We love titles. Everybody loves titles. So it's not the title that should be driving you, it should be the quality of the work you do, the quality of your job description. Is it helping you enhance as an individual? Are you growing? Is your mind growing? Are you growing into the job? Are you bringing new ideas to the job? Are you simply just plodding along? The idea is to create an environment where people are able to feel that level of satisfaction. Now, the point is, if we don't have merit-based recruitment, it can be of course internal and external too, and if we don't pay the right salaries, we won't become, as an employer, we won't become a employer of choice. We have seen, for example, some ministries are probably more prone to it than others. They'll come and join the civil service. Ministry of Finance faces a lot, or economy faces a lot of these issues. They'll work there in the system. They'll get to work with all the multilateral agencies. The next minute, the good guys or good girls get poached very quickly. I'm sure some people in the Ministry of Agriculture do get recruited in other multilateral agencies because they seem to be a main competitor. So the point is that we want people to be able to say, no, actually I'm being remunerated well, and I have a huge level of job satisfaction. I have actually commitment to my country by working in a good job. I'm working for the government of Fiji. They're the kind of external factors we need to create, that sense of, not just the privilege, but the sense of commitment to the job. Now, so we've started the open merit recruitment system, and of course we started last year. First of all, we decided to do, because we want to do this professionally and we want to do it well, and we wanted to ensure it's not going to be a one-off exercise. We've had it in the past, some people have come along and some organizations they've assessed the salaries and said, okay, you'll all get a 5% pay rise, and they go off and disappear into the sunset. No, we want this to be an ongoing exercise. We want to ensure that this job evaluation exercise will carry out. Yes, it will be quite significant because it has not been done for a while. It will be a lot more fundamental. Once we get the fundamentals right, we need to ensure that we are able to be responsive to the market. Because, for example, there may be certain positions that is very limited in respect of the supply. So if we, for example, have very little, to take an example, very little forest conservators in Fiji, and there's a competition for those people with those type of skill sets, we need to ensure that those people within the civil service are actually being paid close to or the market rates, because that demand-supply issue we need to constantly address. And one of the problems has been in the civil service, we've never really responded to the demand supply as far as labor skill sets is concerned. We've maintained the salary rates for a long period of time. We have the inability to sort of respond to the market. So last year, we had the, I've got the notes here for this actually. Last year, we had the World Bank report on the job evaluation, which essentially also helped us to compare what we are paying in the civil service and what people are getting in the private sector. You know, it's a particular benchmarking we've done. So, of course, for some positions, it's a lot easier to do. For some positions, it is not. To give you an example, there are not many people in the private sector that employs nurses. Most nurses in Fiji are employed by government. Similarly, most teachers in Fiji are employed by government or paid for by government. So it's a bit hard to benchmark or do a proper comparison. But accountants, administrators, economists, lawyers, and various other positions, you can actually do very, very good comparisons. Essentially, as a general rule, what we found that the salary level of civil servants at intake level compared to the private sector, we were higher. We were higher. So to give you an example, lawyers employed by the SG's office were being employed at, used to be $23,000 starting salary. Lawyers in the private sector were $12,000. But as the years went by, the private sector lawyers' salary kept on getting higher, and these people's salary kept on getting lower in comparison to the years of service. So essentially, that's a general rule across the board in civil service. You'll find, for example, high school teachers and principals, their salary levels in comparison to, for example, lecturers at universities, is much lower than compared to those people in the private sector. But at the intake level, we tend to be higher, but we kind of stagnate. In fact, we kind of drop too, given the level of responsibility. That is an issue we have to address. We have to address that situation, because this is why you'll find that most people want to leave. Or most people will want to get a transfer to, as in old practice, another ministry, because they say, okay, I've been in senior admin position here, there's no way I'll climb up the ladder even though I may be very good. Oh, there's one position available there in that ministry, I'll go there. So there may not be necessarily any affinity, commitment to that ministry or the work in that ministry, but they'll go there. We found people, for example, who may be in foreign affairs, who've had overseas postings, they may have gone somewhere, they've been there for 8, 10 years. But if they find that they're stagnating in that position, they might suddenly go and apply for a job in Ministry of Forests. All those years of experience, the investment in them, in fact, is no longer relevant. In fact, one would argue it's wasted. So they have to go into this new ministry and start their knowledge base again. So we don't actually encourage also specialization. We must reward specialization. If you become a specialist, for example, in forestry, or if you become a specialist in World Trade Organization rules in Ministry of Industry and Trade, we want you to be there because we want you to go to those international forums and be able to represent Fiji really well. We want the best people to go to the negotiations in Geneva or wherever they're being held and represent us. We have the best person going and representing Fiji. We have the best environmental person going and representing Fiji at some international forum. Not somebody just come new into the job. And because they're going, simply because they have the title. See, we have an obsession with titles in Fiji. Ministry of Education has what? 23, 24 different classifications in the ministry. You should know this, that it actually makes maintaining a payroll very expensive. The payroll maintenance, that is at the back end, actually becomes very expensive. You may not necessarily have to have your administrative officer, SLO, PLO, and all of that kind of stuff. You can just have a cadre of administrative people. And people are then judged on their level of performance, the level of responsibility that they have. the level of exposure, the risk that they have. To give you an example, you may be a teller working in a bank. You may get a particular salary. You may be 4 years into the job. But if you, even though you may be 4 years into the job, but you actually work in selling foreign exchange, on the board, you know, they have a closed room and they actually buy and sell foreign exchange, their salary levels are very high compared to the teller, because if they make a mistake, the bank can lose tens of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. Whereas the level of exposure of that teller is actually far less. So, you see, we have to be able to understand that. So what we are doing, ladies and gentlemen, is that we did that comparison, so it's given us a good footing in respect of where we are. I have to say this because I have not actually responded to any of this. In the past few weeks, as you know, that I understand in the annual general meeting of the Public Service Association was being held and they had elections, and I don't know what the outcome was, but I understand the same people have returned. But during that whole campaigning period, a number of comments were made by some of the officials who were vying for positions. And I remember I was overseas and I received an email from Fiji Times saying that, you know, the President or General Secretary Rajeshwar Singh has said government does not want to look after its staff, we're not concerned. Similar statements have been made that we've asked the Attorney General for 15% pay rise, and they have, you know, he has not responded positively to it, and this is the kind of government we have. Yes, they did come across. They said, no, we want a 15% pay rise across the board. I said, you're missing the point. You may actually be denying your members, how many members, whatever number of members they have, maybe possibly a 25% pay rise. You may actually be denying them a continuous pay rise by just getting a simple one-off 15% pay rise. And they're also missing the point that by having a across-the-board 15% pay rise, you are actually not recognizing the different skill sets that may have different salary levels for people within a particular ministry. You're also denying the fact that by giving a 15% pay rise across the board, that you're not recognizing specialization. You're also saying to people, well, this guy, he is not performing well, he'll still get a 15% pay rise, and the other person who's busting, you know, their chops all the time will also get a 15% pay rise. So the person who's working really hard, say, what's my incentive? This other bloke who comes to work really late, doesn't do most of the work, starts combing his hair at 4 o'clock to leave at 4:30. Why should I work any harder? Because we're all getting the same pay. Or I'm not actually being rewarded for my hard work. That's the point that was lost on them. And of course we have since then also, not since then, but we've been involving them since last year. We've asked them to participate in it. They're not necessarily happy with the evaluation exercise we've done. We will forge ahead and we will continue to do that because it is in the best interest of all the public servants, civil servants. Because you see, unfortunately, again, all of us, everyone, not just in this room, but outside this room, in the community, in the wider nation, we need to start thinking differently. We need to be able to adopt new ways of thinking for us to be able to fit into the 21st century Fiji and for us to be able to be responsive to the challenges that we have. You know, I'll give you an example. I was in Singapore about 4 or 5 years ago, and I went to see the company's office. And you can register at that time a company in Singapore in 15 minutes. 15 minutes you can register a company. It used to take Fiji 1 year previously. It now takes 1 month. They could register a company in 15 minutes and they said to me it's too slow. Their target time was 3 minutes. They want to register a company in 3 minutes. This is the kind of level benchmark. When you go to the private sector in Singapore, they will swipe you off your feet if you say you've come from the civil service. Because the level of integrity, the level of commitment, the level of investment in the civil service is essentially so high that the private sector wants to always poach these people. Though of course a lot of the civil servants have a great sense of patriotism, so they're very committed to what the government is doing. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do through, of course, the PSC, and also is approved by Cabinet, we want to have what we call position-based pay. We want to have points factor job evaluation, a commitment to sustainability and developing the ongoing capability to continue to appropriately evaluate jobs and set reasonable remuneration rates. There's, of course, an open tender process that we had, and we selected Strategic Pay New Zealand, who will also be talking to you and with you today, with PwC, to train you to implement these important changes. So you are very critical in part of this evaluation exercise. You've been selected by your respective permanent secretaries and through the reform unit to be here today. And you will play a pivotal role. Please understand, you're not doing it for others, you're also doing it for yourself. Because your pay is also being assessed and be evaluated. And we have to be very honest about it. One of the areas that we think that is very lacking, with due respect to anybody in the room, is that our HR departments have always been very weak. Unfortunately, governments have not really invested in training people for HR. We need to have very good HR departments. One of the complaints that we have also had is that the HR departments in some ministries are failing their own staff. Because as you know, the jobs now need to be advertised, and jobs are being advertised after the contract has expired, or just 1 week before the contract has expired. And we have said to the permanent secretaries, and they intend to follow that through, jobs should be advertised. You see a list of people who are in your ministry. If their positions are being, the contracts are expiring 6 months before time, you must advertise their positions. They must be given a sense of job security also. They must know beforehand, 3 months before, whether they've been successful or not. If they have not been successful, they can make other arrangements. If they have been successful, they'll continue. We cannot have that sense of insecurity for them too. But that requires the HR department to do its job. Unfortunately, we have seen some people who, for example, because the HR department has not done the job, they've actually had people who have not been paid because they say the contract has not been renewed. Well, because the process was slow. So we have to ensure that we are right on top of the game. Because we must have a sense of compassion for the people who work within our system, who are civil servants. What we are doing, ladies and gentlemen, by having strategic pay, they will, of course, provide the training to you together with PwC, and they will also help with the evaluation exercise, and they'll work together with you. We'll also be talking to other stakeholders, including the public sector unions. And I have to say, the Confederation of Public Sector Unions, some of the unions in those organizations are actually a lot more attuned to what we are doing than perhaps some of the others. So don't treat all of them alike. There are points of difference between them. And I think a lot of them are also realizing that this is actually a good exercise. The other, of course, is we want to have an ongoing commitment to ensuring that jobs are constantly evaluated, as I highlighted, and have a fair, transparent remuneration package attached to them. Our program aims to ensure that we have the capability to fully implement and maintain the important functions of job evaluation and setting fair salary rates. We have established a job evaluation leadership team appointed by the Public Service Commission to oversee the process and ensure consistency across the civil service. Chaired by the Director of the Civil Service Reform Management Unit, Jane Curran here. The JELT, as it's called, the Job Evaluation Leadership Team, includes 4 permanent secretaries, 3 of whom are completing the training with you over the next 3 days. The JELT members are, as I said, Jane Curran, the Director, PS Employment, PSC Tauke Affairs, PS Housing and Local Government, and PS Civil Service, who's sitting there in the first row. JELT's role, Madam, I was going to say JELT's role, Madam Speaker. JELT's role, is to moderate and ensure consistency across the civil service. You know, there was in Australia, as we have done, Australia went through a similar issue a few years ago when the permanent secretaries were given the envelopes, you know, for Seg 1 and Seg 2. They were given the money, and then they were going to, you know, appoint people and set the pay structures themselves. In some ministries, of course, the people up at the top got paid quite significantly, maybe the first half. The bottom half did not get as much. But more importantly, some ministries paid a lot more, perhaps for the same type of job as in other ministries. So you saw people jumping across from ministries. So there's a whole sort of poaching game going on, and jumping the fence game going on. We want to ensure that whilst we actually pay people the market rate, that there is some level of consistency. So if, for example, there is an economist position in Ministry of Industry and Trade, and there's an economist position in Ministry of Economy, and there may be economist position, say, in Ministry of Agriculture, there needs to be some general benchmarking. Otherwise, if agriculture starts paying, exorbitant salaries compared to the others, everybody will want to go, all the economists will want to go to Ministry of Agriculture. So that's the type of thing that we need to also monitor, and this team will also be able to keep an eye on that. So you are here today to be trained as what they call the accredited job evaluators, which is, of course, you will evaluate the benchmark works. You will independently establish the points and bands for the first tranche of jobs that will then be applied to the new salary scales. Following the benchmarking, you will be called upon to evaluate roles as required under the new guidelines. New jobs, change jobs, and where the permanent secretary sees the need to confirm the correct band for a position, because bands may also change. You see, there's a lot of the times in civil service, what we've seen in the past, whilst you have a band, we must have the ability in the system for a person to move within the band. It's very difficult, as we've seen, for people to move within the band in the civil service. Once you lock them into one salary structure within the band, there is no proper mechanism to move people within the band. And that mechanism to assess whether you should move and how much you should move within the band, it must be transparent. If the four of us are on one band, and if the PS for local government, assuming he's not PS for a moment, he is the hard-working person amongst the five of us, then we should have proper KPI measurements for us to be able to recognize the work he's doing and for him to move within the band itself. We can always sitting, all of us can be on the same position, job title, if you like, sitting on the same floor. It doesn't necessarily mean all of us will get the same salary, because some of them will be doing better than others, and that should be recognized. They'll encourage them to do more. It will encourage others to do better so they can also get rewarded. We have absolutely no problem in rewarding people if they're doing the job right. So please understand that. We have to be able to reward people for the jobs that they're doing and recognize it. We must have a system, and that's what we've developed and are developing, where it recognizes hard work also. But we also recognize at this point in time in the civil service that we need to realign our salary structures to the market. We have to realign our salary structures. We made a commitment. Cabinet has made a commitment that this realignment and the new realigned salaries for the positions, all of it must be completed by June of this year. June of this year. July. We need to complete by July, because frankly we need to factor it into the budget. As you know, the budget, the financial year starts on the 1st of August. So you will determine whether new pay salary gets effective for the next financial year or not. But in order for you to determine that, you don't do a hurried job, but you do a thorough job. You need to do a thorough job so we have integrity in the system, so when we do stand up and speak in Parliament and say that now this position will get an increase of 20%, 15%, whatever, we know that we've got something to back it up. And believe you me, the people who are saying today you should get a pay rise, they'll be the same people who question if your pay rise has gone up by 25%. You're saying you're paying too much. So don't be fooled by that. Don't be fooled by that. People who are saying, oh, why aren't they getting a pay rise? The very same people, assuming some position may require 30% pay rise. You never know that. Some may require 40% pay rise. You never know that. If that is the case, then they'll question why we increased that. Same way with the doctors. The doctors have got a pay rise up to 80%. Their positions will also be assessed. You know, talking about doctors, the example that I love giving is that, you know, we have a former Fijian Dr. Vijay Kapadia, who's, you know, open heart specialist, etc. And he's set up this cath lab at CWM with some assistance. They can do, you know, they can go, I forget the actual name, angioplasty They put a tube through here, through your wrist. They can go and have a look at your heart. If your heart is blocked, and they can put what they call a stent. So if your heart, the artery is blocked this much, they can take this thing called a stent and lift it up, lift up the walls and put this so the blood can flow properly. They can all be done at CWM Hospital. And he said to me that the nurses who he selected over a period of time and he trained, he said that these nurses, in fact, they can be recruited by any hospital in Washington, D.C., in London, anywhere in the world. They are so good. Local nurses, Fijian nurses. But their pay scale, because they are, one is a senior nurse, one is just a nurse, is the same as the nurses working in outpatients putting band-aid or bandage on somebody's knee. Because the structure is such, we do not have the system that actually recognizes points of difference and the risk levels. So why should the nurse who, for a moment, if she does something wrong, you can lose your artery and you may die, not be recognized for the risk that she carries, as opposed to the nurse who is actually simply putting bandage on? I mean, this is an important part of the work too. But if she fails, you may miss the wound. If she fails, your artery may close. You see, that's the risk that I'm talking about. So the system must have the ability to recognize the people, even within the same profession, that there are different risks, and those risks need to be rewarded. Because you then encourage specialization. You then encourage people who will go home and then read and want to know more about their job and how they can grow in their job. But if you're not going to have that kind of mechanism in the job system, then of course they'll say, well, I'll get the same job, same salary, what's the point? Might as well come, to work at 8 o'clock, go home at 4:30, no point reading anything. If there's an article in the newspapers, Fijian or whatever, then no point reading it, because how is it going to affect me personally? So this is what we're trying to create, ladies and gentlemen, and you're very much part and parcel of this process. So you're here to be the new evaluators. You will learn the new terms and approaches over the next 3 days. You are the first of our 200. You're the 80 of the first 200. There will be trained evaluators. And of course, as I said, please take your role seriously. And of course, we look forward to the progress in seeing the implementation move ahead as planned. Please remember, we do need to do this, and I'm also saying this to the permanent secretaries also. We like this completed by July, because we can then include it into the budget also. And we believe by addressing it within a short period of time, but in a very focused manner, you'll be able to, as senior people in your respective ministries, see a renewed sense of vigor, a renewed sense of commitment to by your staff to the jobs that they have. And hopefully it'll help you to do your job a lot better, help us to have a greater output from the civil service, and more fundamentally also deliver the service that ordinary Fijians actually require, demand, and also are entitled to. Thank you very much. Naka.